Approximately 350,000 pioneers traveled along the almost 2,000-mile journey from Missouri to Oregon along the Oregon Trail between 1846 and 1869. The Oregon Trail migration is an important part in American history because it helped the United States expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Pioneers were motivated to travel the Oregon Trail because of tough economic times in the East and the promise of free farmland in the West. The 6-month journey was not easy. The pioneers faced many challenges along the Oregon Trail, including starvation, accidents, and disease. If evenly spaced along the length of the Oregon Trail, there would be a grave every 50 yards from Missouri to Oregon City. Every 1 in 10 people died along the Oregon Trail. During this great migration, the pioneers encountered life-threatening diseases and severe accidents, which forced them to turn to the Native Americans for remedies and explore new treatments to expand their medical knowledge. Marcus Whitman led the first party of wagon trains along the Oregon Trail in 1843. He established it as a viable route for thousands of pioneers to use. Marcus Whitman was a doctor and missionary during the 1830s and 1840s. When Whitman was 21, he studied to become a doctor as an apprentice under an experienced physician. He received his medical doctorate degree from Fairfield Medical College. Doctors in the 1830s were not required to complete as much schooling as doctors today. One doctor asserted, "The boy to go into medicine was a son too weak or too lazy for farm work, too stupid for the bar, and too immoral for pulpit." Whitman served as a missionary doctor in 1835 to the Nez Perce and Flathead Native American tribes. In 1843, Marcus Whitman, along with his wife, Narcissa, led the first migration wagon trains along the Oregon Trail to their mission in the Cayuse settlement. Whitman provided medical care for both settlers and Native Americans. In 1847, an epidemic of measles struck the pioneers at the Whitman settlement, killing most of the children. The outbreak spread to a nearby tribe, and they blamed the spread of the virus on the pioneers. Native Americans at that time believed that keeping in harmony with themselves and those around them, their natural environment, and their creator would keep away illnesses and harm. They did not know that the measles was an airborne virus. Several of their members took revenge for what they perceived as betrayal and killed 14 pioneers, including the Whitmans. There was no vaccine for the measles in the 1840s. Measles wasn't the only disease to strike the pioneers. There was a cholera epidemic in the U.S. in the late 1840s. Some pioneers hoped to escape the epidemic by traveling west. They weren't so lucky. Cholera was the leading cause of death on the Oregon Trail. Cholera was an infectious disease of the small intestine that caused severe vomiting, abdominal pain, and cramps. Most pioneers died within 12 hours of the first signs. The bacteria was generally transmitted through water or food that had been contaminated or infected with feces, and the disease spread rapidly. Unaware of what was causing the symptoms, lambdamum, a painkiller, was given to the pioneers who had become infected. Space was limited on the wagons the pioneers used, and even though it was recommended, a medicine kit was not their first priority when packing. The medicine kits often included citric acid to help fight scurvy, quinine for malaria, and other medicines for various illnesses. If none of these worked, opium and whiskey were also an option. Even though the pioneers had all of the medicines for the different diseases, none of the medicines did anything to fight for cholera symptoms. Sometimes the medicine caused death sooner than the disease itself. The pioneers had very little medical knowledge, and many believed the more medicine the person received, the faster they would heal. We now know this is not true. There are several accounts in the pioneers' journals of someone dying due to overdosing. Lucy Deedy recalls the bottle of lambdamum that hung from a nail inside of the wagon, and her little sister, Salida, drank the entire bottle. Salida complained she was sleepy. She then laid down on some bedding and was dead before the family realized what was happening. If lambdamum was unavailable to treat the symptoms of cholera, the pioneers would make sure that the person infected had plenty of water to stay hydrated. It was sometimes difficult to find clean water along the Oregon Trail. For safety reasons, the pioneers tried to remain close to the wagons when stopped on breaks. The makeshift bathrooms weren't always far enough away from the water source, and it could easily become contaminated. They did not know how many diseases that they were contracting were actually coming from the drinking water. The effort to keep someone with cholera hydrated could potentially make them sicker. While there is still no cure in today's society of medical advances, cholera can be treated with a regimen of fluids and electrolytes, as well as antibiotics. The virus that was the leading cause in death in children on the Oregon Trail was diphtheria. Diphtheria is a serious infection of the nose and throat. Symptoms are chills, fatigue, fever, rashes, muscle weakness, and difficulty swallowing. It is most commonly spread through person-to-person contact or contact with items that have the bacteria on them. There is no medicine that brought relief to the symptoms of diphtheria while on the Oregon Trail, so the pioneers would inhale the steam from boiled pine tar. There has been medical advances in curing diphtheria since the 1800s. Now, there is rarely a case of diphtheria in America. Major diseases like diphtheria, cholera, and typhoid presented a threat to the pioneers' lives. Less talked about but still life-threatening were the common cold and fevers. To treat the fever on the Oregon Trail, you must wet the scalp and the painful parts every 2 to 3 hours or until the pain abates. A sickness that is still common today is called mountain sickness. Mountain sickness is a form of altitude sickness. These symptoms were blinding headaches, high fever, and severe joint pains. While there is no real cure for the sickness, the pioneers still tried to ease the symptoms by treating them individually. Even though viruses and diseases were the main cause of death on the Oregon Trail, they weren't the only medical challenges the pioneers faced. A small child was vulnerable to all sorts of accidents, from rattlesnake bites to campfire burns. Accidents in and around the wagon were common as well. A pioneer reported that a 5-year-old Frank Gravel barely escaped with his life when a wagon rolled over him. There were very few doctors in the 1800s, let alone on the Oregon Trail. If the pioneers were lucky, their wagon train included a doctor. Their doctors carried a sort of surgery kit with them. The surgery kit included basic supplies, an assortment of scissors, needles, cloths, and knives. The doctor would treat the gunshot wound by sticking their bare hand into the victim's body and feeling around for the bullet. Once the doctor felt the bullet, he would try and remove it. Not only was this very painful, but the injured victim would get sick from the doctor's dirty hands reaching inside of their body. The doctor did not worry about cleaning their hands or their tools before or after the procedures they performed. Very little was known about bacteria at this time. The contact with unclean hands and dirty medical tools made the people sicker than before the doctor treated them. Native American women shared their knowledge about herbs and remedies with the pioneers. This information had been passed down through generations. The pioneer women learned how to use wild plants as medicine. Both the Native Americans and the pioneers used the prickly pear for food and medicine. Along with using herbs and roots for remedies, the Native Americans also relied on prayers and chants in their healing ceremonies. Some of the Native American remedies adopted by the pioneers included willow bark tea to help nausea, sweating and restricted diet to help reduce fevers, and wild mint for abdominal pains. In one of her diary entries, Jane Gould said, "It seems so sad to think of being buried and left alone in so wild country with no one to plant a flower or shed a tear over one's grave." The pioneers mainly traveled on the trail during the summer and fall months. The rest of the year, the trail was barren and lonely. The pioneers set off on their journey west with very little medical knowledge and only basic medical supplies. The pioneers encountered life-threatening diseases and severe accidents. Doctors were few and far between on the Oregon Trail. Women often had to treat the sick and injured. Yet during the Great Migration, Euro-Americans were willing to risk their lives in the promise for a better life. As part of the Great Migration, they unknowingly became pioneers in the world of medicine as well. Along with the Oregon Trail, they explored new treatments, exchanged information with Native Americans, and applied this newfound knowledge to survive. Many an immigrant hoped that the climate of the prairies and the lush green land of the Oregon and California Trail would do wonders, restoring him to vigorous good health.